So, how trained in special education is the special educators that are teaching your child? This would be important to know. Listen, if we haven't met, I'm Kiara Mayer Cunningham, special education boss, training everyone. It sits at the 504 IEP table to navigate and negotiate successful student outcomes. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, share, all the things. So, as somebody who had a child hundreds of years ago, 29 years ago in special education, I just assumed that when I was sitting across from the table and somebody was a special educator, that they were trained in special education law, trained in special education law. And that doesn't seem like that would be a huge leap, right? Because they're a special educator. There must be requirements and statutes and certification and licensure requirements. But here's what I want you to know. To be a special educator, you have to be first a general educator, right? You have to have a certification, a licensure in your state to be a general education teacher. And then after that, each state has a specific test that they take to become a special educator. Now, I'm not a teacher. I'm never going to be a teacher. I've never been a teacher. But I have taken the test because I wanted to see what it was like that states require for special educators to take. It has very little to do, in my opinion, with actual special education. And so there's a lot of history in it and those sorts of components, but the actual nuts and bolts of educating children, the statutes, the requirements, the regulations, the obligations, the duties, and responsibilities. So, as somebody that represents families all the way through due process hearings, state filings, mediations, and federal complaints, probably 20% of my clientele are actually educators. Probably two-thirds of the people that we teach and train nationally, thousands of people that take our trainings, are educators. Why, Karen, are they educators? Because the school is not educating them in the specificity of special education law. So special education is a federal authorization that happened December 2nd, 1975. It was called the Educating All Handicapped Children Act. And December 2nd, 1975, President Gerald Ford signed it into authorization. In 1990, it became IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it's had a reauthorization since then in 2004. Final regs were submitted in 2006. So I, as a special education advocate who does this for a living full time and trains full time, am obsessed with this book. You know what this book is? This is IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Individuals Disabilities Education Act. Okay. This is not a little book. It's not a small book. It's not a PDF. You don't just flip through it. It used to be 315 pages long. Now it is just 115 pages long. I would be hard pressed to walk into a school building, an elementary school, a junior high, or high school, and ask for somebody to produce one of these books. You would think you wouldn't be allowed to be a special educator without one of these books because this is your handbook. These are the requirements that we're bound by. Every state then has their own state regulations. So I'm in the great state of Texas. Our state regulations are right at around 385 pages long, just our education regs. That's a lot to know. And then every 2 years after a legislative session, they might have changed. Now, the federal law doesn't change, obviously, very often, and no state can reduce the benefit of federal law. But I want you to know that when you're sitting across from the table from wonderful people who we love, educators, and they are describing something to you, it may or may not be completely accurate. And if it's not completely accurate, it's completely inaccurate. See, in the law, there's no gray area. It's either accurate or it's disinformation. And disinformation leads to children not having successful outcomes. And for me, that is a deal breaker every single time. So there's nothing wrong with when you're sitting across from educators to find out what is their education. I was in a meeting the other day with a young lady. She became a special educator in 1984. So it is now 2024, 40 years later. Would you assume that there would have been a requirement for her to take a special education class between now and then? Would you assume that? I would have assumed that. Guess what? You and I would have been terribly wrong. So in Texas, educators have to do 200, I think it's 100 or 200 hours. Is it 100? I think it's 1 or 200 hours of continuing education hours. And they self-report. There are no parameters around what those are. They just have to self-report that they took their hours. And so most educators who are amazing are using their tiny little income and they're going out and they're paying for education. And we appreciate that. But that is not a duty or requirement. And so you might have amazing teachers who love children, but do not understand the law. You have amazing paraprofessionals who love children, but aren't taking data. You might have amazing related and instructional service providers who are not implementing the requirements of IDEA. So I want you, there's a link in the bio, to get your own copy of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. These are federal requirements. This is a book of requirements, not a book of suggestions. So it's the Office of Federal Register. It's 34 CFR, Title 34, Volume 2 of 4. Make sure that you get this book. Make sure that you understand what the law is so that you can partner with school districts to make sure that your student has successful student outcomes. Because if we don't get it right for the child, we didn't get it right for anybody. We'll see you guys in the next training.